Hello everyone, and welcome to this Diablo 3 dungeon guide for the wizard Tal Rasha's Element set. We'll be going over how to set up your character, and I'll also explain how to complete both primary dungeon objectives. Keep watching until the end to see a full playthrough of the entire set dungeon with additional tips. To get started, let's first take a look at the set bonuses, so we'll know how to gear out the rest of our character. This set requires you to have 4 different skills, each with a different element, to maximize your damage and toughness: fire, cold, lightning, and arcane. Each time you cast one of the 4 skills, you get an application of a stacking buff. Once you reach the maximum count of 4 stacks, you can keep it refreshed by continually casting at least 2 of the 4 skills. Additionally, meteors are periodically dropped, one for each of the 4 elements that provide extra damage. Since the set bonus focuses on the elements and not on specific skills, there's a lot of flexibility in what you can choose to use. So for gearing purposes, the pieces you need to obtain are based on what skills you choose, rather than skills that are predetermined by the set. In this setup, we are using 6 of the 7 set pieces in the helm, torso, hands, legs, waist, and neck slots. In the feet slot, we have Nilfur's Boast, which adds damage to the meteors generated by the 2-piece set bonus. We will be taking Arcane Orb as the main resource spending skill, so we have Wizard Spike in the main hand weapon slot and Triumvirate in the offhand slot. For rings, we have Focus and Restraint for extra damage boost, which fit in comfortably and naturally in a build where we will be frequently casting both Resource Generator and Spenders. In the wrist slot, take Warzetchian Arm Guards for excellent run speed increase. And in the shoulder slot, there aren't any overly useful legendary items, so take anything with good offensive or defensive stats. When it comes to rerolling stats on our gear, the desirable stats are anything that boosts damage output or survivability. For Kanai's Cube in the weapon slot, we have Unstable Scepter, which boosts damage for Arcane Orb. In the armor slot, we have Frostburn for extra cold damage to also boost Arcane Orb. And in the jewelry slot, a Convention of Elements for another damage increase. For gems, there isn't anything critical, so just use a standard loadout. The legendary gems aren't critical either. All 3 legendary gems shown here provide damage increases that will work favorably with the set playstyle. Next, let's go over the skills. Remember, for the set, we need 4 different skills, each with a different element. We'll be using Electrocute with the Surge of Power rune for lightning, which is our arcane power generator. Arcane Orb with the Frozen Orb rune for cold, which is our main arcane power spender. Black Hole with the Spell Steal rune for arcane. And Meteor with the Meteor Shower rune for fire. In the other 2 slots, we take Magic Weapon with the Conduit rune for a damage buff, and Teleport with the Wormhole rune for increased mobility. For the passive skills, we have Prodigy for increased arcane power generation, Elemental Exposure, which has great synergy with the Tal Rasha set for increased damage, and we round it out with Power Hungry and Audacity, both which increase damage. Next, let's go over the dungeon objectives. The first primary objective is to kill 90 enemies while the Tal Rasha set bonus buff is at its 4-stack maximum. Just by playing the build naturally, you will automatically get this objective without any additional focus. Once you initially cast all 4 skills and get to 4 stacks, you will constantly cycle between your Resource Generator, Electrocute, and main Resource Spender, Arcane Orb, with occasional casts of Black Hole and Meteor. You should be able to keep at 4 stacks throughout the entire dungeon, but if they do get reset to 0, then just repeat the ramp up and continue cycling. The second primary objective is to not get bitten by a rockworm. These monsters spawn underground and are initially untargetable. Once you get close to one, they will burrow to directly beneath your feet. If you stand still for too long, they will pop out of the ground and bite you. They are extremely finicky, their movement is very quick, the duration they stay underground is unpredictable, and the distance you need to be from one to avoid getting bitten is inconsistent. Throughout the dungeon, you will need to constantly be looking at your minimap. Luckily, all monsters are shown, each represented by a skull. The most reliable way to deal with the rockworms is to keep all monsters at bay at the far edges of the screen as much as possible. The goal is to keep your play area clear so that when you approach a rockworm, you'll be able to identify them more readily and you'll have more room to work with. Once you get in close proximity to a rockworm, they will very quickly rush toward you. If your minimap is relatively clear, you will easily see a skull rush toward you at obscene speed. Pause for a brief moment, then move away from the worm. If done correctly, the rockworm will stay put and pop out of the ground, where you will be at a safe distance away to turn around and blast them. Unfortunately, this will take some practice to get a good feel for it. If you wait too long, the worm will pop out and bite you. If you move too soon, then the worm will continue to follow you. With some practice, you'll find the right groove of stutter stepping to properly bait the worms to pop out of the ground. Teleport can be used to move out of the reach of a rockworm, but it's not necessary and may not be reliable enough if it's on cooldown. Most likely, you will need a few attempts to get the hang of dealing with these worms, so don't get frustrated and just keep at it. Another tip that may ease the pain with the rockworms is to make sure you have a follower assigned. The Templar in this case is the best choice since he will stay in melee range and may be able to gain the attention of the rockworms and absorb some of the blows. Next, let's take a look at the dungeon map. I've broken up the map into 5 different segments that each contain 2 rockworms in them. There are 10 total rockworms in the dungeon, and they always spawn in the same locations. Though the worms can be frustrating to deal with, it makes it easier when they're always in places you can expect. It's a good idea to get familiar with the dungeon layout and spawn locations, so you can increase your guard when you're getting closer to a rockworm, making sure to keep the play area cleared of other monsters and paying extra attention to the minimap to identify which skull is the worm. So now that we have the setup and you know how to approach the dungeon, let's head to it. Go to Act 1, then to the Old Ruins waypoint. Head northeast and travel down the path. Go past Adria's hut and around the bend. The entrance is off the west side of the road next to a crevice in the ground from a large uprooted tree. And next, let's take a look at the playthrough. Once inside the dungeon, cast your magic weapon buff, and then cycle through your 4 elemental skills to get to the maximum stack count of the Tal Rasha set buff. For this run, I went with very bare bones gear to demonstrate techniques. Any additional items or stats that you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier, will give you an easier time completing the dungeon. The first rockworm is right here. Try to bait him. Be careful, in this case, he shifted up and didn't burrow underneath us. I stayed at this doorway a few seconds to clear any monsters that might try to follow us and clutter up the minimap. We're coming up on the second rockworm here at this corner. Bait him, move back, and blast him. A good time to use Black Hole and Meteor is to focus down these larger elemental heretic monsters. Time to turn around and head to the second segment. I don't use teleport often, but it may save you a few seconds when backtracking. This room can get very cluttered, so make sure to take your time and keep things cleared. Here's the third rockworm. Bait, move back, blast. Just keep constantly moving forward, mainly focusing on alternating casts of Electrocute and Arcane Orb every few steps. This makes it really easy to keep your stacks at the maximum. And we already completed objective number 1 with plenty of time to spare. The fourth rockworm is just through this door. Another reason why you want to keep the set buff at the maximum 4 stacks is for the resistance benefit. It really makes a difference with your toughness. Check this thin pathway for any monsters, and then head back around to the top corner to start segment number 3. The fifth rockworm is just around this pillar. Really watch the minimap since you don't have great line of sight here. Rockworm number 6 is in this thin pathway. We really had to step far back to get him to pop out. Check for any stragglers and then backtrack to segment number 4. This next room can also be very cluttered, similar to the room encountered earlier in the dungeon. Take your time to clear the minimap to get eyes on rockworm number 7. The 8th rockworm is here at this bottom corner. Mix in Black Hole Meteor Cast to take advantage of the extra meteors from the Tal Rasha's 2-piece set bonus whenever you feel like you could use some extra DPS. And now we enter the last segment of the dungeon. Rockworm number 9 is right here at this corner. And the last rockworm is around this top corner. Be very careful coming from this angle because you won't have great line of sight. And that's a wrap. Good luck trying to finish this one. If you enjoyed the guide and would like to see more content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.